Hello. So this is my first development diary that I'm going to do for a game that I'm currently calling Fragile Existence. So it's a space-based RTS style roguelike, if that's the thing. I'm making it a thing. And so this is something I'm quite excited about. I've been working on for about 2 months now. And this is actually a picture from the game. It's a sort of 3D environment. You click on the ships, you tell them where to go. You can give them waypoints, that kind of thing. Typical RTS style affair. And you can have space combat, that kind of thing. And the idea is that you're trying to survive in space with a limited fleet, and your supplies are dwindling, and you've got to keep moving from system to system. And so it's got a bit of a roguelike element as well. But I'm just going to sort of talk about today sort of basic gameplay elements, sort of like a bit of a design document, challenges that I know or were a problem or will be a problem. And I'm sort of putting this on here because given the sort of the current situation outside at the moment, I sort of had a bit of free time, and I learned to use Unity about 3 months ago or so, and I've had a really good experience with it. Really enjoy it, and I thought, why not? I'll give it a go, see if I can make something a little bit on a bigger scale. Try not to be too ambitious, but ambitious enough that it looks impressive, and something that I've really wanted to make. I'm quite excited about it. I'm going to try not to go on too long because I pre-recorded this video before and it went on for about 40 minutes. I'm hoping not to do that this time. Just a quick look through inspirations. Battlestar Galactica, huge inspiration here. Fleet on the run, being chased by a ruthless enemy. I also love the flirting with realism that happens in that, especially in Series 1 where they're constantly on the run. They constantly got to get resources, and they're running out of water and supplies to make. They've got to start thinking about making new ships, getting new pilots going, that kind of thing. Homeworld is an obvious inspiration in terms of style, in terms of look. I think Homeworld is probably the closest thing that we've got to go on. Stellaris, I love 4X games. Stellaris, I love the whole tactical pause thing that they added in that game. So it's real time, but it's also got a turn-based element as well. And I really want to sort of incorporate that kind of style as well. So you're moving your ships around, but you can also pause and sort of still give instructions that will happen when you unpause. So it gives you a bit more breathing room, time to think. EVE Online, I love how you sort of have this modular component based system for your ships. You have the sort of the capacitor at the bottom, and you've got to have enough power for all your systems, and it shows you your hull and your shield ratings as well. I really want the ships to sort of each have a sort of bit of a life of their own, I suppose. So you can see all the components of the ships in that sort of fashion through some sort of UI element that will hopefully be ingenious enough to show everything you need to see about each ship without having to open lots of panels. And I don't really like having lots of screens that clutter the display. I prefer if we could just click and see everything you need at a glance. And I've included FTL because of the roguelike element, FTL is a rogue style game. And you're jumping from point to point and you're trying to survive. And I think it's very similar to what I'm doing, except we're not doing one ship, we're doing a whole fleet of ships, and the fleet's got to work together more than there being set challenges at each jump. It's a case of jumping from system to system, trying to make the most of each opportunity. Anyway. So what programs I'm using, Unity 2019.3, I'm going to upgrade to 2019.4 RTS, which is the long-term support version when that comes out later this year. And I also use Blender 2.8 for my modeling purposes. I don't have a massive background in 3D modeling, but I've done plenty of programming over the last 10 years. Modeling, ideally I get somebody else in to do 3D models, but at a pinch I could do it, and I'm more than happy to do a bit of it as well. So core gameplay, we have Earth here. Let's imagine we're a good few hundred years in the future where we started to colonize various systems, and we have some sort of warp capable type engine that lets us jump to nearby systems, and without taking years or whole lifetimes as we would at the moment. And we colonize most of our system and several other systems, that kind of thing. But anyway, so when we start, you sort of see a scenario where you're at Earth and a big bad alien just invasion force comes along, and they're like destroying everything, pew pew pew. And it just so happens there are a couple of ships still in orbit, which represent the ships that you've chosen to be the ones that fly off, make the jump to warp to another solar system. Okay, so Earth is a big no-no now, can't go back, can only go forward, and turns out that these guys are going to be following you as well. So you get to this planetary system, and the idea is that you're going to send people down to the planet from your little ships and collect resources, things like water, food, ores to be processed to create new systems or repair things or make new fighter ships, train people up, that kind of thing. So it's resource management, and you're in this system for as long as you can possibly get away with before these guys manage to catch up with you, and then you either turn and fight for a little bit if you're still mining to things or trying to make the most of what you can find, but then you jump away again and the pattern continues at another system, and you do the same thing there, and hopefully you've got enough resources again, and that continues. So the big bad invaders just keep following you, but you also will have sort of more local amphibious populations that you might have to deal with. There'll be remnants from Earth, even little colonies who don't necessarily want you to steal their stuff or might even choose to join you. There may even be alien species out there. There may be more sort of animal-based life forms out there that aren't necessarily people you can communicate with, but will cause you all sorts of trouble whilst you're trying to mine for things and trying to survive. So that's the core gameplay sort of loop. There's 9 ship types I've currently got in mind, and I'm sort of broadly classifying them as military, civilian, or industrial. So the military is pretty standard fare. You get your carriers, which carry smaller ships, send out scouting parties or bombers, those kind of things. You're going to have to train pilots up, but and actually build the ships when you lose them. But carriers pretty useful, pretty diverse sort of platform. You got frigates, which is the name I'm giving to encapsulate a range of sort of militaristic main vessel. So they'll have railguns, they'll have the big armaments. They might even have troops on as well. So they're sort of your main bulk of a military force. There'll also be stealth ships. These just happened to be in the system when the invasion happened, and these guys are really good at avoiding being picked up on sensors and things like that. They're really fast, but they're not necessarily as well equipped. The civilians get the liners, which are like the space equivalent of like a cruise ship. They got all the trimmings, they got all the luxuries, but now they're going to be turned into sort of people carriers, filled with lots of people that you can make use of, put to work, that kind of thing. The civilians will also get science vessels, which is a little bit more taking from 4X games, where you might send out a ship to do some research at a certain point, maybe on a planetary surface or in orbit somewhere or a moon, and they'll develop new technology for you. And then we have what I'm currently just calling a yacht, which is like your millionaire's ship. You know, they're zipping around the galaxy really fast, and they're going to be really good for scouting. You know, really fast, and you know, get in and out, that kind of thing, but no real firepower what to speak of. And then industrial, we have haulers, which are like the space version of big freight ships that we have nowadays. So you can carry a hell of a lot of resources with a hauler. Get refinery ships. So that lets you do things like refine ores out in space along, you know, as you're going along, rather than having to rely on being on a planet for a prolonged amount of time. Sorry. And you also get construction or mobile construction ships. And these are the only real ships that you can use to build, you know, really big ships as you're still going around, rather than having to build things on the ground or in sort of fixed installations in space, so they can do it inside the ship. So the idea is at the beginning of the game, you're sort of given a choice of what sort of ships you want to start with. You can have all 9, or you can have multiples of each one, or you can just try and make the game really hard for yourself and have, say, just a stealth and a yacht ship. You know, you've got no real firepower, you've got no real capacity, you can't really carry all that much stuff. You know, you're making it very difficult for yourself, and that's where the sort of the roguelike element comes in, because there may well be more reward for doing so. Whereas, say, if you have a carrier, a liner and a hauler, then you kind of got all the bases covered. You might not be able to do any science, at least not ship based, but you'll have a good line of defense for the carrier. You have lots of people to make use of in the liner, and lots of storage space for resources. So you can change up the game depending on what you pick, and you're not necessarily limited to what you start with. You can build other ships, you can find ships, you can expand your fleet in different ways. But if you do lose a ship, it's a big loss, you know. So you lose that liner, that gets destroyed, and suddenly you're down to a carrier and a hauler. You've lost all those people. There's going to be a counter up in the top corner of the game that will tell you how many people you've still got left, and that number can only go down. And so that's when you run out of people, you're basically going to lose the game. Okay, so we also want to bring in the planet surface. Currently I've sort of thinking wise where we have an orbital layer when we're around a planet, and we have a ground layer. Okay, it doesn't necessarily have to be a terrestrial planet, it could just be a rocky planet. And so the idea is that you'll have units in space, and you can have sort of installations on the ground as well. Now, there is some concern about the scale here, because obviously if you can see a ship in orbit, you probably shouldn't be able to see any units on the ground, given the scale I'm showing you at the moment. So that needs to be think about, but the idea is generally you'll send people down, you'll have like a sort of expeditionary force, it's not really colonizing, and you'll build some construction things, some mining rigs or that kind of thing, refinery systems, and you'll actually see some representation of your people on the surface, and you might want to protect them from above. And so if the big bad guy catches up with you and you end up having a bit of a combat in space, you know, they can also attack the guys down on the surface as well, and they can deploy people down to the surface that might also be attacking your people. And so you don't just have this one tactical layer, you have two, and they interact. So the ships can bombard people on the surface, and people on the surface similarly can use some sort of technology to attack ships in space. And so you know, you've got to be thinking about not just about your ships, but also all your people on the ground and how they sort of can help or be hindered by what's happening elsewhere. Okay, so that's the general idea, and obviously you scout out your planets. There'll be certain locations on the planet that are interesting, and you'll send people down to sort of see what you can find, and send scout ships around to pick out these locations. And you do that across the whole of the solar system, hopefully, if you've got time. And you're trying to find as many resources as you can to keep going, keep jumping to the next system before the invaders catch up with you. Okay, so finally, just wanted to look at what the design challenges are for a game of this sort of scope. I suppose the key one really is that it's an RTS in essence. It's sort of on a smaller scale. There's no big multiplayer elements, there's no network latency to worry about. But there are a lot of entities to keep track of, a lot of information to store about each one. We need to think about collisions. We need to think about pathfinding. And since we're dealing with planets, that generally means we're talking about finding a path, plotting waypoints around a sphere. And because a sphere is continuous as opposed to a flat sort of tiled surface, we need to be considering what the best direction is to go around a sphere. There's also interactions between the different sphere layers as well. So that sort of comes to the big one, which is AI, the behavior of AI in this environment in particular. So I haven't really done any work on that yet. So AI is something that I haven't experimented with at all in this context. So that remains a pretty big challenge. I also want to introduce the tactical pause function or feature, and so that has to override the RTS elements and be able to stop certain things from happening whilst also still being able to give orders that will then be carried out when the pause is turned off. Okay, so the other key thing I feel is a flexible camera system. So this needs to be an orbital based camera and a zoom camera. So I wanted a camera that will move around a planet and allow you to see everything. So use the mouse, scroll around the planet in any direction, be able to see any part of the planet, and also be able to zoom in on any single entity around the planet, both in space and on the ground. So that gives you that sort of dynamic, viewpoint that you get in a lot of space games these days, where you can see up close what's actually happening. So that's quite a big challenge as well. The other one is a UI. So I want a UI system that is component based. And what this really means to me is that the ships themselves are made up of components, so power cores, bridge, engines, weapon systems, life support, that kind of thing. And so each component will be represented by a UI component. So when you actually click on a ship, the idea is that you only really see what the ship actually has and the abilities that that ship lets you use, rather than there being some standardized UI layout. And this is sort of done in RTS anyway. When you click on a unit in, I don't know, like I can't think of an RTS right now, Stellaris for example, you automatically get feedback based on what ship you clicked on, and you can only do certain things. But I really want to take that a bit further and see if I can make a UI that sort of shows everything without needing lots of extra panels and extra things, menus, and that you need to click on to get to what you want to see. I just want it to all be quite easy to get at. Another big thing for me is the 3D modeling, which is something that I might not necessarily do all myself. I'm happy to do as much as I feel I need to, but I'd rather be programming, so I may well get somebody else involved to help with that. Same comes with sound design. I haven't really looked at this at all. Music, that kind of thing. Again, I might see about getting somebody else to do a little bit of sound design for me. And then there's things like resource management, and I've talked about that being something you do in the game, but I mean in terms of balancing. Like, how many resources makes an interesting game. Do you really want it to be a micromanaging nightmare? I don't. I want it to be, there are just enough resources to make it interesting without weighing the player down with too much. And then it's a case of how much of it is automated. Games these days, Stellaris is a notable case where you have the regions and it sort of takes over control of various colonies after a while because there's so many to manage. In our case, you've got less ships, so it should be less of a problem, but I don't want it to fall into the trap of it being a micromanaging nightmare, but then not having, and then also not doing it the other way where there's only a handful of resources and it's far too easy. So it's getting that right. Okay, so that's an outline of the design challenges, and I'm going to finish it there. I'm sure I've gone on way too long. And I realise that I haven't really shown that much in this video. I'm going to in future. The next dev diary next week or so, I'm going to start talking about actual systems mechanics that I've been trying to solve a certain problem in Unity and sort of looking at how I actually solved that. Okay, thank you for watching. I hope that's been interesting in some capacity, and I hope you're as excited as I am, and thanks again.